Genesis chapter 46. Genesis chapter 46. Today we're going to look at Jacob, who is going to journey to Egypt to see his long-lost son, Joseph. If you remember last time we met, we saw that Joseph finally revealed himself to his brothers. After all those years, after over 20 years, they had not seen Joseph. They didn't know what had become of him after selling him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt. And not just in Egypt, but you're familiar with the story by now. He interpreted Pharaoh's dream. It saved Egypt and the surrounding areas from the famine, because not only because of interpreting Pharaoh's dream about the coming famine that would follow the 7 plenteous years, but having the God-given wisdom to know how to prepare for the famine. And so if you remember, Jacob sent his sons to go get food in Egypt because the famine was affecting that area, the land of Canaan. Joseph recognized them as his brothers. Finally, after all those ordeals with kind of playing with them and setting them up and making them look guilty and all of those things, that he finally revealed himself to them as his brother. They were shocked. They received the shock of their life. They were scared. They had all these mixed emotions. And Joseph said, guys, don't worry about it. Don't feel bad about what you did to me. Not in the sense that they shouldn't feel bad about their sin toward God. We went over that before. But basically he's saying, don't feel bad about the suffering that you put me through, because look at the end result. Look how God used it. So don't worry about that. I'm not holding it against you. I'm not mad at you. I'm not going to throw you into prison. I'm not going to have you executed. I still love you, and I'm concerned about the rest of my family. Of course, we saw Benjamin. He wanted to see his younger brother Benjamin, and then especially he wanted to see his father Jacob. So he told him, he said, okay, now that I've revealed myself to you, I want you to go down and tell Dad what has happened during these past 20 years and bring him up here. And so I'm going to send all this food and all of these wagons and everything, and I want you to go down there and tell Dad that I have sent him an invitation to come up here to dwell in the best land of Egypt. I'm going to take care of you guys the rest of your lives. You're going to have it made. You're going to be rich. You're going to be treated like royalty. And I just want to see my dad before he dies, now that he's old, and I want him to know that I am still alive. This whole time, remember that Joseph's brothers had led their father to believe that Joseph was killed by a wild animal. Terrible, terrible. And I don't know exactly how they broke the news to their dad that, hey, Dad, guess what? You think about it, because he didn't believe that Joseph was still alive when they told him. They said, you don't believe us? We didn't believe it either. But look, here's the proof. All of these wagons and all of this food and all of these 20 different donkeys and things that he sent from Egypt for you to bring him back. And so then he's rejoicing that his son Joseph, his favorite son, is alive, and he's going to go. And how exactly those boys broke the news to their dad about how Joseph ended up there and how they sold him and lied to their dad. I don't know exactly how they broke the news to him and what culminated after that. But anyway, we're going to continue in chapter 46 with Jacob going to Egypt. And it says in verse 1, and Israel took his journey. Israel. His name was changed to Israel. We see in the Bible, even after sometimes somebody's name is changed, it still uses their old name sometimes interchangeably, and that's what we see here. Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. Beersheba is a southern portion of Israel. So before he goes to Egypt, because remember, he's in the land of Canaan, and if you remember the geography, the land of Canaan is something like an area like here, and this encompasses part of modern Israel, and then Egypt is over here. So he's going this direction. And so he has to go through the southern portion of Canaan and in Israel, Beersheba, modern day Israel or later on Israel. Beersheba is somewhere around here before he gets to Egypt. And so he goes to Beersheba, and look, it says, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. Now that's very interesting, because we see through the Bible, and especially in Jacob's past, that he seemed like, he definitely had his faults. But we still see that he worships God. And you have to remember, sometimes these men in the Bible, where the Bible is not silent and doesn't overlook the faults and their sins, you have to understand sometimes that's not characteristic of their entire life. We're reading the highlights of somebody's life in maybe 30 minutes or an hour of reading. And we're reading these things, maybe it'll take us an hour to read somebody who lived something over 100 years, you see? And so it's easy for us to see, well, look what he did here, look what he did there, look what he did there. Oh, this guy was just wicked to the core. Well, yeah, but you're just seeing a handful of things that he did in 100 years. See? It also says he offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac before he went. Verse 2. And God spake unto Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Notice he calls him twice. We see certain parts in the Bible that are significant where God will call somebody and he calls by their name twice. Remember we read before when Joseph interpreted the dream. And remember that Pharaoh dreamed twice? It wasn't the exact same dream, but it was the same event. And he said, and the thing is twice because the Lord has spoken it. Pay close attention to things that are repeated in the Bible. There's some significance with that. Jacob, Jacob, and he said, here am I. Notice he's quick to respond. You see certain men in the Bible where God will call them, and they'll say, Lord, here am I. What will thou have me to do? We see examples of certain men, certain prophets, certain people who God is calling. Other people, they will ignore God's call, or they will delay in their response. When God calls upon you to do something, you should be quick to answer, quick to obey. Don't delay. Somebody once said, delayed obedience is disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. You ever heard a parent tell their kid to do something? I remember hearing my sister when my nephews were a lot younger. Go take a bath or something. They're sitting there playing video games or watching cartoons or playing or something. Go in there and take a bath or go clean your room. Okay. They say okay. They answer okay, but they don't do it. Okay, Mom. 5 minutes later, I said go take a bath. Okay. 5 minutes later, he's still do. Finally, the patient wears thin, right? Get in there. I said get in there right now. Put it down. He starts crying. Well, if he would have done it the first time like he was supposed to, could have saved himself some trouble. Now, that kid said okay. That's the right response, right? Okay. But he didn't have the action to match the word, the response. Delayed obedience is disobedience. He was saying okay, but he was actually disobeying because he didn't do what he was told to do. Verse 3. Here's God speaking. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Now, why is God telling him to go, or not to be scared to go into Egypt? Why would he be scared? Wouldn't he be looking forward to it? His son Joseph is there, who hasn't seen for over 20 years, who he thought this whole time was dead. He sees that they had sent, along with his other sons, all these animals and food and money and carts and everything to go and take him to Egypt. He was rejoicing. That seems like it would be something that he would be very much looking forward to. But did he have some sort of reservation or hesitation as far as if it was God's will? And why wouldn't it be God's will? Well, remember, where did God tell them to dwell? Canaan. 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 So he has to leave Canaan and go down to Egypt. And it could be because, go back to chapter 26. We see another time where God told somebody, don't go to Egypt. And there was a famine. Similar scenario. Chapter 26, verse 1. And there was a famine in the land, just like there is now, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Verse 3, sojourn in this land, Palestine, the land of Canaan, and I will be with thee. So he says, I'm not going to be with you if you go down to Egypt. I don't want you to go to Egypt. I want you to stay in Canaan. Fast forward to chapter 46. This time, it's different. Verse 3, and he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. See, so he said, okay, this time I'm giving you permission to go. This time I have some plans. I'm going to accomplish my will in these circumstances. Verse 4, I will go down with thee into Egypt. See, I'm going to be with you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to provide for you. And I will also surely bring thee up again. So he says, you guys aren't going to stay there permanently. Don't think that I'm changing my mind about the promise that I gave to your forefathers about inheriting the land of Canaan. That promise is still binding. He says, I'm going to bring you guys up out of, as a nation, bring you up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Now, what does that mean? And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. It is thought that that is a custom that occurred when somebody died. Go to chapter 50. When it says, Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes, there was a custom at this time when somebody was old, they were on their deathbed, they were about to die, and they would have family members around them at their bedside. There was a custom where either the closest family member would actually put his hand on their head or on their face or on their eyes as they're dying, as they breathe their last breath, kind of like as a final goodbye, comforting type of thing. Or, you ever seen pictures of maybe from the 1800s, people who are dead? I remember I saw this series of the 1800s of the Old West, of Time Life series of the cowboys and things. And you'd see people who were dead, and you know what they would have on their eyes? Coins. Coins. Why is that? Why would they have coins on the person's eyes who was dead? To keep them closed. To keep them closed. So, it could be, this is another thought on this is when it says, Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes, that instead of somebody else doing that before the proper burial ceremony or something, that it would be a close family member. It's a cultural thing. That's what it's thought to be as far as the historians and the commentators. And look at chapter 50, verse 1. And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. This is when he dies, or right after he died. It's actually right after he died, because look at the last verse of chapter 49, verse 33. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered unto his people. So he dies right after that, chapter 50, verse 1. And Joseph fell upon his father's face and wept upon him and kissed him. So that could be something that's related to where it says, Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Go back to chapter 46. So, by all indications, it seems like when God says, go down to Egypt, and Joseph's going to put his hand upon thine eyes, he means you're going to be there, you're going to die in Egypt, and Joseph is going to be there with you, comforting you, and giving you that last ceremonial, cultural, closing, comfort act right when you die. He's going to be there at your bedside with you. Verse 5. And Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him. His sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. I told you before that I'm not sure if these are his literal biological immediate daughters, because Dinah is the only daughter mentioned by name of Jacob. So it could be that these are actually his sons' wives, his daughters-in-law. We do see that the Bible does take liberty to use these names of relatives, brother and son, even though it's actually a nephew or an uncle or something like that. And these daughters could be, like I said, his sons' wives, because go down to verse 15. It's talking about his offspring and his sons and all of these people. And verse 15 it says, These be the sons of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob in Padanaram, with his daughter Dinah. And so she's the only one mentioned by name. Now, if he had other daughters, it seems like it would have mentioned them by name too. Why is it only mentioning Dinah? Some people say, well, it's not mentioning them because the sons at this time, the men were more important, and so they're talking about the offspring of the boys. The girls, the daughters weren't really that important, so it's not going to mention them by name. Well, then why does it mention Dinah? See? So, I'm not sure about that one. Now, it's going to have this genealogy and all of these sons and who they bore the names and all of these people, about all these sons that went with him into Egypt. And we're not going to go through that whole list. So let's skip all that and let's go to verse 25. These are the sons of Bilhah, which Laban gave unto Rachel his daughter, and she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. Verse 26. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. So it's telling you all of Jacob's descendants that go into Egypt, and it's going to give the number. And in that verse 26, what number did it give? 66, right? Okay. The Bible is going to actually have 3 different numbers of all the people who went into Egypt. And so we need to look at this and figure out what's going on. We have one number, 66. Look at the next verse, 27. And the sons of Joseph, which were born in Egypt, were 2 souls, and all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were how many? 70, right? 70. All right, so we have 66. Then we have 70. Hold your place here. Go to Acts chapter 7. Does the Bible have contradictions? The skeptics say yes. The Bible has seemingly contradictions, but if you look at the context, you compare Scripture with Scripture, most of these contradictions, as you know, are not true contradictions. They're easily reconcilable or easy to figure out. Sometimes one verse is talking about additional details, and that's why it will say something differently. Acts chapter 7, Stephen is preaching, and he gives a history lesson of the nation of Israel through the Old Testament. And he recounts this event of Joseph being sold into Egypt. And look what he says in verse 14. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him. That's what we're reading right now. and all his kindred, how many? 75. 75. Now we have 3 different numbers of people who went into Egypt. So what's going on here? Anybody have the answer? How many were there? Well, all of them were correct. Well, why does it say 3 different ones, though? Why wouldn't it just give the same number in all these passages? Well, let's look at this a little more closely. And that's what you need to do when you encounter things like this. You need to look at these things more closely and figure out exactly what it's saying to try to figure it out. Compare Scripture with Scripture. Go back to Genesis chapter 46. In Genesis chapter 46, he says in verse 26, all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. Okay, notice some key details here. It says the ones that came with Jacob. It doesn't say Jacob is included in this number. It says the ones that are coming with him. Correct? Did it say that? Okay. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives. Okay, so it's not including Jacob himself, and it's not including his daughters-in-law. It says besides Jacob's sons' wives. All the souls were 66. Now look at verse 27. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. So, there are 4 extra ones in this number. This one is except Jacob and except his daughters-in-law. This one, if you add 4 people to this, this would be plus Jacob, right? And Joseph, and 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. You see that? Now what about this one, though? Where do we get the 75 from? Go back to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7, verse 14. Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him, and whom? All his kindred. All his kindred. Well, all his kindred would include some of the ones that are not included over here. Okay? All his kindred would include the daughters-in-law. All right? And it may, you say, well, that's only 5 though. Didn't he had 12 sons, and then Joseph's already there? Yeah, but it may not include these here. You understand? So there's no real contradiction. This would be total, maybe not including these here, but it would include these here. You see? So you have to look at these close details. See what exactly is going on. Why are the numbers different? That's why. So there's no real contradiction. Go back to Genesis chapter 46. Everybody understand that? Okay. There's a lot of verses like that in the Bible, especially in the Gospels, the parallel accounts of the crucifixion and things like that, where there's different details, and it'll say 1 person, the other verse will say 2 people, and you have to look at it more closely and figure out what's going on. And most of them are that easy. Genesis chapter 46. So we see there's no real contradiction. It's easily reconcilable. Verse 28. Let's continue. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. Goshen would be the eastern part of Egypt, where he told them to go and dwell. And they came into the land of Goshen, and Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father. Okay, so Joseph is in Egypt proper. They don't go all the way to where Joseph is. He's calling them to go dwell in Goshen, the eastern part of Egypt. Judah is going ahead. Joseph goes and meets them. And look what it says, verse 29. And Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to meet Israel his father to Goshen, to present himself unto him. And he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So finally, they meet each other face to face. Finally, they have a reunion. It's kind of like the father and the prodigal son, remember, when he returned home finally, and he was so happy to see him. Verse 30, and Israel said unto Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. Now, finally, I'm content. Finally, my life's complete. Finally, I'm not going to have to go down into the grave thinking that my favorite son is dead. Finally, I can rest in peace. He says, now that I've seen you, now let me die. I finished my bucket list. How many of you have a bucket list? Do you know what a bucket list is? Do you know why it's called a bucket list? It's a list, not always written down in paper, but sometimes just a mental list that people have of things they want to accomplish before they kick the bucket, before they die. Why is it called kick the bucket? What I read, and sometimes you're not real sure about the accuracy of some of these word origins and things, but pretty morbid. Now, I don't know if it's true or not. It's something I read. Somebody, when they would hang themselves, right? Is that what you heard too? You stand on a bucket or something and hang yourself, and you jump off, and then you're dangling and fighting for your breath, and you kick the bucket. Some of these sayings and things were really morbid in history. I mean, just weird. Even nursery rhymes and things. If you study the history of some of these nursery rhymes and how they've been so watered down and Americanized, if you read the origin like from Europe, it's just, oh. You're like thinking, what? This is something for children? You know, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. You know what that's talking about? Dying from the bubonic plague. It's just, God, it's weird. You know, well, death was just, people didn't have such a long lifespan like they do now. So it was a lot more casually talked about things back in that time. Anyway, not to get off on that, but a bucket list. How many of you have a bucket list? Raise your hand if you have a bucket list. There's some things that you want to accomplish in life before you die. I only saw one hand go up. For real? You're the only, no, none of you have a bucket list. What's one thing on your bucket list? More traveling. Where do you want to travel to? Yeah? Okay. One thing that I had on my bucket list was chasing tornadoes. I accomplished it, but I still want to keep doing it. One time wasn't enough. I'd like to visit Europe someday when Nathan gets older and he's old enough to remember and experience it and appreciate it. I'd like to travel to Europe one day. Other than that, I think I've accomplished most of the things that I want to accomplish. Question. Will a Christian regret anything that he didn't do in this life other than things that please God? You know, Christians have a bucket list. Before I die, I want to visit such and such place. Before I die, or some people say, but actually they're older and they figure it's too late, and they say, I wish I wish I would have fill in the blank, learned a musical instrument, learned a foreign language, traveled to this particular country. I wish I would have done this. A lot of them are just selfish, not bad things, but just things that they would have wanted to do for themselves. My question is, will a Christian regret any of those things in eternity?
I don't think so.
I can't imagine a Christian being in heaven in New Jerusalem and saying, man, this is great. This is wonderful. If only I would have just visited France, and then I'd feel content. If only I would have learned to play the piano, though. I mean, it's beautiful. Up here it's paradise. But I still wish I would have ran a marathon when I was still alive. I don't think a Christian's going to regret those things. Now, if it's something like, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids when they were younger, yeah. Because that's something that pleases God and has a positive impact on other people. I wish I would have witnessed more. I wish I would have done more for God. I wish I would have passed out more tracts. I wish I would have read my Bible more. Miranda?
Do you think that we are going to have those regrets through eternity? No. Or just until God wipes away?
Well, I would say definitely at the judgment seat of Christ.
Yeah.
But, no, I don't know. But, if the judgment seat of Christ is going to affect eternity, perhaps, or it affect your status in the millennium, because you lose rewards, right? You can lose rewards, suffer loss. I don't know. Miranda?
I was just thinking of later on, God's going to wipe away
Right.
our tears.
Right.
So that would, to me, that seems like, we're not going to be crying about anything.
Right. I don't know. I think it's very safe to say that there will be regrets. I don't know the duration of that. I don't know if it will last for all of eternity. But it will be at the judgment seat of Christ. And, well, put it this way. I think it's safe to say that you might regret it for 1,000 years. The millennium. Right? He says to those servants, some have rule over many cities. Some have rule over few cities. Others, what I gave you, I'm going to take it away and give it to somebody else. See? But I don't think anybody's going to regret any of these things as far as what most people have on their bucket list. I want to go jump out of a plane, skydiving before I die, all of those things. Yes, Miranda.
Before my dad passed away, my dad thought for sure the rapture was going to happen before he died. He got saved in his 30s, and he was so looking forward to the Lord calling us, and going in the rapture. And I think he was kind of disappointed, when the doctor told him, that he wasn't going to live. But I'm sure when he got there,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard some Christians say, I'll be disappointed if the rapture doesn't happen in my lifetime. Okay, yeah. I don't think you'll be disappointed though after you die. Once you're there in eternity, you're not going to. Oh Lord, why couldn't you have kept me alive a little bit longer? You're going to be like Paul. It's like, oh man, forget that. What? Live 20 more years on earth just so I can experience the rapture? No way. I'll take this. This is way better. It's like it's kind of that type of thinking is kind of like when I was a child and I thought, when I grow older as an adult, I'm still going to watch cartoons and play with toys. I used to think, man, I can't wait till I'm an adult and I have a job and I have all this money. I'm going to buy the best toys and I'm going to. That was my childish thinking.
It changes into
now I have toys, but they're cameras and guitars and surfboards. Yeah. See, so, all right, so he's happy that he finally sees his son. Notice, though, he says in verse 30, now let me die. Now let me die. In other words, it sounds like he's saying, I am so glad I finally saw this. I feel like my life is complete. Now I can die happily. And he says, let me die. It sounds like he thinks that he's ready to die at this point. But notice that he lives 17 more years after making this statement. How do I know that? Look at chapter 47, verse 9. Chapter 47, verse 9. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. All right? So Jacob's talking to Pharaoh and he says, I'm 130 years old. Correct? Look at verse 28. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. So when he says in verse 30 of chapter 46, let me die, he's saying that 17 years before he actually dies. Did he think he was going to die? Was he that old that he said, you know, I'm ready to go? Did he want to die? I don't know. I do know this, though, that he lived 17 years longer. And I do know that some people get to a certain age and they figure, well, I'm a certain age, so I can't really do anything. They get in this sedentary state, this mindset, like, well, I'm too old to do this. Now that I'm such and such, or my health is failing me or something. And it's not a good thing to get into that type of mindset, because I understand, maybe if you're really, really old and you can't even get out of the house. But what happens is people slow down, they quit exercising, they don't watch their diet, they put on weight, they get out of shape, and then they feel like, well, I can't exercise now because I'm so out of shape. Well, part of the reason why they're out of shape because they stopped exercising and they stopped watching their diet. And so their quality of life decreases. And it is true that they do have less energy, but part of the reason why they have the less energy is because they stopped taking care of themselves. And I say that, you say, well, who are you to talk? You're young. Well, yeah, but I do things now that surprise people. I do things and people say, oh, how old are you? And you're still doing that? You're too old to be doing that. Well, I'm still doing it. And a lot of people say, well, I'm too old to do that. Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Did you know that somebody ran a marathon at the age of 92? 92-year-old ran a marathon. Somebody who was 100 years old climbed Mount Fuji. Somebody who was 82 years old walked a tightrope across Grand Canyon. No, I'm not saying that everybody should be able to do that. I'm giving you some examples of how here's people who are what we would consider old. And you would think, well, this guy, he should just sit on the couch and play checkers or something all day at the nursing home. And these people are out living life more than the average 25-year-old. A man who was 77 went into outer space. A 64-year-old swam the distance from Cuba to Florida. Actually, not the distance. They did. From Cuba to Florida. Swam. A 64-year-old. An 89-year-old traveled to the North Pole. An 80-year-old climbed Mount Everest. See? Now here's Jacob saying, let me die. And he lived 17 years longer than that. I wonder if he had reached that age where he thought, well, I'm just going to sit here on the porch and drink iced tea and listen to the birds chirp and just wait to die. The Bible says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. Now, I understand there's physical limitations and health problems and things like that creep up on you in your old age, but I think a lot of people are actually able to be more active than they are, and I think a lot of it is just kind of the will and the mind and just thinking, I'm too old for that stuff. That's for the younger people. When you have these examples here. Right, Nappy?
Yes, sir.
Nappy's
81.
Nappy's doing what? Yard work and passing out tracts?
Yes, sir.
And what else?
Playing golf.
Playing golf?
Playing golf.
All right. And Janine? And they're coming here. Huh? Stay busy. Stay active. It's good for the body. It's good for the mind. It's good for the soul, right? Stay active.
Amen.
Stay busy, right? Some of you in here, you're older and you're active and you're healthy and you walk a lot, and I can see that it's a good thing. And by the grace of God, I'm going to try to do it myself. I'm still try to be active. I don't want to get one of these older, out of shape guys, man. I'm not picking on anybody in here, but I'm saying I as I get older, I see the need for it and the importance of it. All right, so especially serving God. Okay, you don't want to get to the end of your life and think, man, I wish I would have done more for God. I think a lot of people, they get in this mindset, they say, well, I'm too busy now. I'm raising a family. I have a job. I have this. I have school. I'm too busy. I can't go soul winning. I can't get involved in the church. I can't do this. Maybe when I get more time, maybe when I retire, then I will have time to serve God. Well, a lot of the people who are the most active for God, not always, but a lot of the people who are the most active for God are the ones who are active in all the other areas too. All right, let's continue. Verse 31, and Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle. Notice the word cattle in the Bible does not always refer to cows. It can refer to sheep and goats, as it does here. And they have brought their flocks, sheep, and their herds, and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, what is your occupation? That ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Notice Joseph did not instruct them to lie. He says, hey, guys, okay, here's the deal. The Egyptians don't like shepherds, okay? So when Pharaoh asks you guys what your occupation is, don't tell him you're a shepherd. Tell him you're this. Tell him you're a craftsman. Tell him you're whatever, but don't tell him you're a shepherd. He didn't say that. He said in verse 34 that ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle. And they were, sheep and goats, from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen. So you're going to stay in Goshen, this certain portion away from the rest of Egypt proper. You're going to stay in Goshen. He says, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Go to chapter 43, verse 32. 43, verse 32. The Hebrews were known to be shepherds. They were known to be nomadic. And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves. because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. I wonder why. Why would that be? Look at chapter 47, verse 3. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? Just like Joseph said would happen. And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. Well, Joseph said, the Egyptians don't like shepherds. Shepherds are abomination to the Egyptians. They could have lied, but they didn't. Now, why were shepherds an abomination to the Egyptians? Some people say probably because the Egyptians had a religion where they thought that certain animals were sacred. And the Hebrews, the shepherds, killed those animals both for food and for sacrifices. And so it could be that that was the reason why. Some people say, well, it's because these other shepherds came and invaded Egypt and there was this long-lasting conflict and rivalry between them. I don't know if that's true. But what's interesting is, if you want to make a spiritual application, there is the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ. And it says, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Egypt is a type of what? The world. So if there's the chief shepherd, and a shepherd is somebody who tends sheep, and believers, Christians, are sheep, and it's our job to shepherd younger Christians, right? Then in that sense, we are shepherds, and every shepherd is an abomination to the world, the unsaved. Every Christian, Jesus Christ, and all of his followers are an abomination to the world. What did Jesus say about the world? Go to John chapter 15. John chapter 15, verse 18. If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. The world's going to hate you. Why? Because they hate Jesus Christ. They hate you because of who you follow and what you stand for, and it's because it stems from their hatred for Jesus Christ and God's Word. Go to Proverbs chapter 29. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 27. An unjust man is an abomination to the just, and he that is upright in the way is abomination to the wicked. You are an abomination to the world. Every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. Notice that they didn't lie. They proclaimed honestly that they were shepherds, even though they knew that they were abomination to the Egyptians. You know, Peter said, I'm not one of them. No. Mistaken identity. I'm not with Christ. Not me. He was scared at that moment in time. I'm not one of them. If you're a Christian, you're going to be an abomination of the world. Don't be intimidated or shy or embarrassed about proclaiming that you're a Christian. The temptation might be there. The temptation, I'm sure, was there for Jacob's sons. But Joseph said, even though you're an abomination, you tell them that you are a shepherd. Interesting spiritual lesson there. All right, so that will be the end of today's lesson. We're going to end with the end of chapter 46. We'll continue chapter 47 next week. Anybody have any questions about any of that?